Welcome back to another episode. Today's topic is the free market. Free market. Well, if you go to the store, if you shop online, you're working within the construct of a market. And what essentially a market is, it's a place of trade. Now, regardless of whatever type of market you actually shop in or do business, that market could be a retail store, it could be a thrift shop, it could be a yard sale. But whatever that essentially is, that market creates an environment in which supply and demand can actually be addressed. And so, usually, when you hear of the market, you're usually looking at, let's say, financial markets, let's say stock exchange, things like that. But the market is really anywhere you go to actually purchase goods or services or exchange goods or services. So, with that, supply and demand are incredibly important. Why? Because the larger the supply, usually the lower the demand. But the lower the supply, the higher the demand. And that actually impacts prices and essentially where they actually go. So, why is understanding a market, and especially what a free market is, why is that actually important? Well, the whole idea of a free market is a free market isn't just a place for trade, it's an open place of trade, which means a lot of the rules and a lot of the control are removed so that you have access to the best items at the best prices. There's competition there. So there's not, let's say, one organization that's in control or one individual that's in control. It's really what does the market say they want and who essentially is fulfilling the need within that market. So that's what a free market is. In other areas of the world, well, depending on where you are in the world, the market might actually be more free, and in other areas you might have a lot more control. And control, just like the game Monopoly, is where you only have, let's say, one individual or one organization that's in control of a particular part of the market. And for that very reason, they actually set the prices and they dictate what actually happens. And so when the control is on the business side, you're not really going to have as much of a free market. But when the control more is on the individual side or the population, and they essentially get to dictate, what happens within the market, I think you have a freer market in that case. But why is it important to know what a free market is? Well, when you're in a free market, you can actually practice negotiation. This is something that's incredibly important. If you heard anything about in the other episodes in regards to what negotiation is and how it actually works, it's something that we use every single day. So being able to practice it within a free market is important because it allows you to improve those negotiation skills. The next piece is you can identify hidden treasures. Just because there's a certain price associated with something, the ability to barter and negotiate to change what that price is depending on how badly someone wants something, or how much they actually want it, or badly in the case of they really need it, or just I don't really need it, but I'll sort of play the negotiation game anyway. You can kind of dictate and change that price based on what someone wants, what someone actually needs. And when you go to yard sales, odds are you're going to find a much better deal at a yard sale, let's say, than you would in a retail establishment. Because a retail establishment, they have set prices for everything that they actually sell. So if you want it, you got to buy it at that price. If you don't want it, well, if you're not willing to pay that price, then you essentially leave and you say price shop and see if you can find it somewhere else. But every now and then you actually had that opportunity to negotiate if the box was damaged or if something's just not 100% with that particular item. But you go to a yard sale and your expectations are much lower. You're not expecting it to be in a pretty box. But if you find something that you really, really want, then odds are you can negotiate and barter to get a very good deal on whatever it is that you want. So that's what you see within the difference of markets, just in general. Something that's going to be more controlled in a retail market, set prices, a lot more control there. But in something that's a yard sale or a thrift shop, again, there might be some set prices, but that's just the start of the negotiation. So usually when you're in a particular environment, you can tell if there's room to negotiate or if it's just like things are kind of pretty tight and you have to make your decisions based off of that. And then last but not least, you get comfortable being uncomfortable. When you negotiate, the more experience you have with it, you kind of have thicker skin and you can sort of brush things aside. It's not that big of a deal. But if you don't negotiate very often, you might find that your emotions kind of get to a peak and you don't necessarily think as clearly or as rationally as you do otherwise. So you might jump to some hasty decisions when you negotiate for the fact that you haven't had enough experience with it. So that's why a free market is actually important to make sure you're actually interacting with. Where are they going? Well, with the whole idea of e-commerce, social distancing, wearing masks, and sort of just control that you have from big businesses, they kind of are slowly disappearing a little bit as far as this idea of a free market. Because most of the markets we go into, they're retail establishments. There's a lot more control over how they work and how they operate. And as a result, we don't necessarily have as much control over what we actually can do to impact our buying experience. And so as a result, you essentially pay the prices that are set. So the environments are becoming endangered a little bit by a few of those things that are happening. If there's less questions being asked during that sales process or during that sales experience, because again, you're just looking at the item, maybe you're doing your homework, maybe you're doing sort of a little more on the back end, but maybe you're not interacting with folks as much as far as, well, how long will this solution actually last? And I think when you're taking away those questions, again, you're inhibiting the market. And then last but not least, when people start becoming desensitized to asking questions, they start accepting what is. And when you start accepting what is and negotiation disappears, again, we're in a world, we've come in a world that there's a lot less control, or a lot less control that you actually have, because you're essentially giving that away by that curiosity kind of disappearing. So we don't want that to happen. We don't want the free market to actually disappear. So how do we bring them back? Person-to-person interaction, the real world, or an internet extension. If we can actually see faces, if we can see people talking, if we can see their body language, those are all important things when we actually talk about interacting and negotiating within a free market. Playing more games, low-stakes games, where you're not worried about making a mistake because the stakes are very low. You can afford to make mistakes. A learn-to-play model. Again, you practice it before you actually do it. So that's something that can help there. Avoiding monopoly or control by actually having competition. And that one's really important. You need to be able to compete. You need to sort of just recognize that maybe you don't have all the answers, or maybe, whoever you're talking or interacting with, maybe they don't have all the answers either. So just kind of having that open competition and sort of exploring everything that's out there is going to be important. And then balance. No one person or group should have all the power, right? If we can sort of put those various things in place, we can sort of move more to this idea of an open or a free market. And then what to recognize? Well, this is a hard problem. The whole idea of a free market is a hard problem. There are rules that can be put in place, but the whole idea is that by having rules, you're creating an element of control, right? So if you're creating an element of control, how can you have something that's free if you've already kind of inserted control in it? So it's like this chicken and the egg thing. It's like, which one do you actually do first? And, wow. So you have a hard problem. We can only get to solutions or something that leads us in the right direction by actually making mistakes. We have to be willing to make mistakes. I've seen a bunch of mistakes made just in regards to, how is the economy essentially going to work? How are we going to move this to this idea of a free market? But we have to be willing to say we actually made a mistake so we can actually learn from that and improve on it. And we need to define good and bad, not just better or worse. And it's this idea of moving, in the right direction, but we need to make sure we have our ethics intact when we do it. There's been a lot of compromise that I've seen, especially, in government and just within change of administrations and everything going along with that. And anytime you're thinking better or worse, you're not really putting ethics into the equation. I think that's something that needs to stay there and not disappear. So if you got anything from this talk today on free markets, okay, are the opposite of monopolies, where monopolies have a lot of control with the individual or the group that essentially is offering a product. A free market has the control that's with the population, or more so on the individual side. And this is the same shift, the same explanation as the difference between freedom and equality, because freedom and equality are at opposite ends of the spectrum. Okay, you don't necessarily have freedom and equality. You have freedom or equality or some balance thereof. And so if you actually look at how freedom and equality work when you're actually looking at a free market and monopoly, freedom is actually going on the side of a free market. Free market, freedom. You see the free, they're both tied in there. But believe it or not, monopolies are actually creating control. And monopolies and equality are actually along the same lines. And being along the same lines, that control piece is what's going to restrict things from being free. So when you think of monopoly, you think of equality, think of control, because that's controlling what that experience is going to be. But when we think of free, then you essentially get to make your own decisions. So it's a hard problem because there's so much debate over what we actually need and what needs to be in place. But the better you actually understand where each side actually stands and what the layout of your environment actually looks like, you can make better decisions. So I hope you enjoyed this episode on free markets. If you have any thoughts or ideas or anything you want to share, I'd love to hear them. And again, I appreciate you tuning in and can't wait to share the next lesson with you. All right, have a good one.